Welcome, ghouls and girls, to another vintage paperback horror review by Frankenoise. This one is The Revenant by Hugh Zachary. It's a 1988 Onyx publication. Right there. It's my first Onyx publication, and I was pretty impressed. I'd say about more than halfway through this book, I was kind of on the fence with it, but then by the end of it, I absolutely loved it. It's a great classic ghost story. And by classic, I also mean I find it very similar to Amityville, especially well past the halfway point. There's a lot of things similar with Amityville, and you may pick that up when I'm reading some of my notes here I have on it. But by the ending, it gets totally different. But still, I can see Hugh was very influenced by Amityville, or at least, got some ideas from it. For the most part, just as a base. But what we have here is a family of four. We have Vance and Jean, a young couple in their 30s. They have two kids. One is named Min, and the other is named Ridey. I think I'm pronouncing that right. It's Ridey. I've never heard of that name before, but it's Ridey. Anyway. So what they do is they're looking for a house, of course, for cheap in the middle of nowhere because they don't like the city anymore. So they happen upon this old house in Louisiana built in 1888, and they get it for a very cheap price, $60,000, which I think is $40,000 cheaper than what the real estate agent was asking for. But he's actually apprehensive about a family moving in, and of course, as a reader, you kind of obviously know why. There's a ghost there. But the family doesn't really pick up on his not wanting them to move there. But so they buy it for very cheap, and they move in. And the family soon meets a fellow named Jack. Jack has been around that property for years and years and years. And what he does is he goes around the house sometimes and just gets rid of homeless people because it's been vacant for a while, obviously because there's a ghost there. And he also has a metal detector, and he goes around looking for pieces of Civil War antiques, because the house happens to be situated in Louisiana, right where there was a battle. And the old house was actually destroyed during that battle, but they built a new house in 1888 on the foundation of that old one. And we'll kind of get to that, what's in the foundation. So yeah, the family moves in there, and soon they meet this guy Jack, and Jack kind of just sort of gives them a little history on the house. Not everything. He doesn't even know there's a ghost there. But so Vance conveniently has to work nights for a whole month, which I was like, whatever. So he leaves his wife all alone with the kids. She doesn't work, of course. She just takes care of the kids. So she's got the house all by herself at night, and pretty soon, funny things start happening. They're nice things. In one instance, her daughter Min, her bed sheet keeps getting pulled back onto her foot at the end of the bed because it, sometimes kids kick their feet out of the sheets and stuff. But she sees this ghost or unseen presence pulling the sheet over Min's feet, and it's kind of cute. And then you soon realize that it's a nice ghost, and Jean happens to pick up on the name that it's Ilsa. So she's actually liking this ghost and talking to Ilsa. She can't see her yet, but Ilsa doesn't like a closet closed either. So when there's a vacuum shoved in there, Ilsa will just throw it out. And so they kind of test it a couple times, and sure enough, Ilsa just tosses this vacuum out, and the kids like it, and it's kind of cute. So Jean writes a letter to Julie, her best friend, who happens to be a psychic. You seeing any similarities here with Amityville? So she writes her friend, the psychic, about this ghost, and then Julie eventually phones Jean and tells her she's picking up an evil presence in the house. It's not Ilsa, it's something else. and it's in the basement or under the basement or under the foundation. So don't go digging there because there's evil there. So Jean tries to convince Vance that there is a ghost there, and of course, the ghost doesn't appear. Only appears when wanted. So then Vance eventually meets Jack, and kind of they become friendly, and they both start, of course, digging around the backyard, and they actually find a skeleton of a Confederate soldier, which I think is pretty cool. And then that's at the time where Julie says, "Well, don't go digging anywhere near the house." But Jack's of course curious about the house. He's never had people live in there yet, so he's never been allowed to dig around there. So he wants to dig under there, and he convinces Vance that, yeah, let's go digging for treasure. I heard there's treasure buried in there from, the Civil War. It's going to be worth a fortune. So eventually they do dig a little bit, just enough to pique Jack's curiosity. And then one night, while they're asleep, Jack actually enters that area in the basement, unbeknownst to Julie or Jean and her kids, and he's actually frantically digging and digging and digging until his fingers are bleeding into this brick wall that seems to be blocking something, much like Amityville. That wall in the basement that's blocking the force. So he's digging and he's going all crazy, and Jean's actually worried about this guy. She doesn't think that he's possessed or anything. She's just, wondering what's going on. And then eventually she calls the police, and Jack gets arrested. And then eventually Jack, I think the next night, escapes, unbeknownst to the family, and goes back to where he was, and starts digging again, but ends up dead. And when I mean dead, his face is just mutilated, worse than mine. It's got like cuts, gouges. His ears are missing. His nose is missing. It looked like he's been mauled by a bear, or coyotes or tigers or something. One of the kids actually joked, saying it's a tiger. So Jean, of course, being the only adult there at the time, is held in the police station. So since Vance is at work and can't actually be located, they have to get a babysitter. So they get this 73-year-old neighbor who knows the area, and she babysits the kids in the house, kind of like Amityville, except that was like a teenager. But Catherine's older, and she starts hearing things, of course. She thinks it's Elsa, this ghost that the kids are friendly with, but no, it's an evil presence that Jack had inadvertently dug up by, scratching through this wall, digging just a little hole, just enough for this evil to come out. And Catherine is violently killed, broken bones, everything, tossed down the stairs, left in a big heap. So yeah, Catherine's dead now. And then what happens? Vance actually starts getting curious, and almost like in Amityville when the husband is getting possessed, although Vance is not possessed, he's just very curious of what's under there and what's doing all this evil. So he starts digging, and while he's digging, upstairs in the house, shit hits the fan. Furniture's flying everywhere towards Jean and the kids. Min is actually attacked and grabbed by this unseen force, which the kids call the Mean Man, and she's actually bleeding because of it. And everyone's scared, and then they actually see how Ilsa got killed. I won't spoil that, but this is pretty neat. And then Jean goes running outside and is actually thrown into a time loop, seeing the house getting bombarded back in the 1860s during the Civil War, and it's actually a pretty cool chapter. And then, but 5 hours elapse, even though it was only minutes, and hummingbirds in the present time are actually dead on the ground, and so they're all pretty freaked out. Julie then arrives by plane, which was actually delayed twice. She was going to arrive earlier, but she finally arrives. And then the only part I didn't get in the story is after all that happened, they decided to stay in the house overnight. Uh, I don't know why. A normal family would just get the hell out of there, especially when the kids are attacked. But they decide to stay, and then they sleep in the house, and then they end up realizing that Ilsa isn't free, and Julie, the psychic, wants to free her. So they figure the only way to do that is to actually just, since the evil's out already, just dig up the basement, see what's there. Um, so they do that, and then they dig in the house, and they eventually find treasure, and there's gold and everything. But they also find is what caused the evil. There's like a family that's been tortured. We can tell their fingers have been broken. There's two kids as well with rib cages broken, and you can tell the bones have been eaten by dogs. And they also find Ilsa's journal, and this is when I really started liking the book because I'm reading entries from the journal, and you find out how Ilsa got to America. She was an immigrant from Germany, and she gets to America with her husband, and her husband dies in the war during some train accident derailment, I think. And then she meets this guy named, now his name's hard to pronounce, Josias Fulcher, I believe his name is. We'll just go with Josias. He's a slave trader, very mean man. He actually uses Ilsa purely for sex, and but he whips slaves in front of the children, in front of Ilsa. He also whips the children, and eventually Ilsa meets a Confederate soldier and falls in love, and then of course Fulcher catches them, and those are the people in the basement, all tortured, and they've been buried in there for over 100 years. And that's kind of how the story wraps up. They also, to finally get rid of this evil and Ilsa as a ghost, they do like this seance, and a spectral battle happens, which is interesting. I never read a spectral battle, poltergeist battle before, but that was pretty neat. So they do the seance, and that's how they defeat Fulcher. And basically the story ends. The family moves back to the city. They're not doing that small town stuff ever again. And they move back to the city, and kind of live happily ever after. One hopes, after they left behind a few deaths, which is unfortunate. It's always other people that get killed when the family unleashes this evil force, So, but yeah, story was awesome. Like I said, you got to get through the first half, which can be kind of tedious because you know what's going to happen. You've read the story before, but the ending was cool. Like I said, reading the journal entries for Ilsa was great. I wish there was almost like a whole book on it, but of course that would be a kind of, I don't know, something that Hugh Zachary would have to do and invent himself. But it's really neat. I highly recommend The Revenant, right here. If you see it, just pick it up. And yeah, great book. I gave it 4 bony fingers out of 5. And there were a couple scary parts. I've read a lot of horror and watched a lot of horror movies, so I wouldn't say scary as in I was like freaked out, but a couple scenes were very spine tingling. What is that?